And we're pleased to welcome in Maine Senior Senator Susan Collins. And Senator Collins, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here.
Senator, I want to talk policy with you, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit of politics. We did get some news. Janet Mills, Maine's governor, obviously it's been rumored for a while whether or not she might be interested in jumping into this race. She's now saying she's going to decide by November. I normally wouldn't ask you to comment on somebody who's not in the race officially, but if I may, your reaction to that?
Well, the Democrats look like they're going to have a very crowded primary, and they're just going to have to sort this out and decide who their candidate's going to be.
And Senator, as a follow-up to that, it's clear that Democrats are targeting this race. We obviously have seen this for quite a while in your races as well. There was a protest at your recent event earlier this week. Your reaction to whether or not you think that's going to be the tone throughout this campaign?
I certainly hope not. I talked with the protesters yesterday. I answered some of their questions. What was sad is they completely disrupted a ceremony that a wonderful coastal town, Searsport, was having to celebrate a new road and better sidewalks. And this was a big deal for the town of Searsport. The local officials have been working with the State Department of Transportation and with me for some time, for years on it. I was able to secure millions of dollars to help bring it about. And they wanted to have a community celebration. Instead, I was not allowed to speak because the protesters kept shouting me down. And I think that's really unfair to a community like Searsport.
And again, we're still more than 14 months away from obviously this election, so there'll be plenty of time to talk more politics. But suffice it to say, you're ready for whatever comes in a political battle, but you hope that there's some civility that's included.
I do hope that there's civility. That's usually been the way that we conduct campaigns in Maine, even campaigns that are very contentious. You don't usually see protesters preventing someone from speaking. And they not only were yelling me down, but also the town manager. And I just thought that was really unfortunate. You know, Greg, you've covered, I think, every single one of my campaigns.
I have, yes.
And
for Senate, anyway.
That's right. And I've always had tough opponents, and I'm proud of the fact that the people of Maine have honored me by re-electing me, and I believe I've delivered for them. I've certainly worked my hardest.
Let's talk some policy as well. Obviously, you are now the chairperson of the Senate Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful positions in Washington. At the same time, we've obviously seen President Trump doing some fairly extraordinary things when it comes to executive orders, when it comes to budgeting, and you have been pushing back on that. In fact, you were one of the 3 Republicans who voted against the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. In the weeks since that vote, are you still concerned about some of the things like Medicaid cuts and some of the things happening when it comes to the budgeting process?
I am very concerned about the president's budget. I met today with a group of business people, including members of Maine Health here in Portland. And the Medicaid cuts are really tough, particularly for our rural hospitals. Now, I support some of the changes that were made. I believe if you're an able-bodied adult, that there should be a work requirement if you don't have young children and you're not engaged in caregiving for, say, a parent who is ill. But I don't support slashing Medicaid in a way that will jeopardize the very existence of our rural hospitals. And that's why I worked so hard to get a $50 billion fund included in the bill that will help somewhat with our rural hospitals. But I think that the Medicaid cuts are going to be very tough.
Let's ask a follow-up on that, too. We heard Speaker Johnson, the president, and others saying that this is really about waste, fraud, and abuse. And certainly there's an interest from all of us to want to make sure that there is, if there is waste, fraud, and abuse, that's being eliminated to the greatest extent possible. But we've also heard people push back and saying, no, wait a minute, a lot of these folks who may be eliminated from coverage should be getting it under our current rules. Do you agree that it's all waste, fraud, and abuse, or do you think there really will be some people who really should be on Medicaid who are going to be cut out?
Let me give you a direct example. The bill requires recertification of eligibility for Medicaid. I don't think that's fair when you're dealing with a child who has a lifelong disability that's very severe and qualifies for coverage under Medicaid. So let's say that child's being raised by a single parent who's trying to work, take care of the child, perhaps the other children, and forgets to file the paperwork for eligibility, or an overworked family doctor forgets to submit the paperwork on time. Then that child is going to lose Medicaid coverage for a time. That is just cruel. That's wrong. And that's one of the problems I had with the bill. So none of us is for waste, fraud, and abuse. I support work requirements for able-bodied adults without young children, but I don't think cutting the formula in a way that's going to result in already inadequate Medicaid payments going further down is the right thing to do, and I do think it's going to affect access to care and jeopardize some of our rural hospitals. There are 5 of them already that are really teetering already.
And Senator, let me also ask this. We saw this week about 182, I think, employees of FEMA wrote a letter basically pushing back on what the Trump administration, President Trump, is doing in a very direct way, saying they believe that FEMA is being essentially gutted. I remember, because we've talked about how long I've been covering you as a U.S. Senator, I remember interviewing you in post-Katrina and the push to sort of strengthen FEMA. Are you concerned about the future of FEMA right now?
I wrote the bill to strengthen FEMA after Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. And one of the things that we did is we strengthened the regional offices so that they could respond much more quickly, much more effectively. And FEMA plays a critical role in supplementing the efforts of state and local governments, which are easily overwhelmed when there is a natural disaster. So I agree with the FEMA employees who wrote that letter, and I'm pleased to say that in the Appropriations Committee, we did not gut FEMA in any way.
Do you believe that part of that law actually specifically says that the regional administrators need to be professionals? They can't be political appointees. They should be people with express experience in emergency management. Do you think the Trump administration is actually violating the spirit of that law right now?
I am convinced that the Trump administration is not following the law and is weakening our ability to respond effectively when there is a disaster. Think of how many severe weather events we've had in Maine in the last couple of years. In January of 24, in December of 23, we had such severe weather that it took out nearly 50% of the fishing infrastructure in this state. Now, a lot of that wasn't covered by FEMA, but FEMA was still there assisting communities with public infrastructure. And I was able to secure some funding to help with the private infrastructure. So we're seeing an increasing number of hurricanes and severe snowstorms, windstorms, flooding all over the country. So the last thing we should be doing is making FEMA less professional and less able to respond to those terrible disasters.
Well, certainly a lot of folks worried that Maine is overdue at this point. It's been since 1991 since we had Hurricane Bob come through. Senator, I do want to ask you as well, looking ahead here, when you return to Washington next week, there's right away going to be a lot of work on focusing on the budget. Obviously, the continuing resolution expires at the end of September. There are, I think, 12 full-year appropriations bills that are going to be, you're going to be right in the thick of that. Would you like to see some of those actual bills pass, or is it going to be another CR, a continuing resolution that we see as we close it on potentially another threat of a government shutdown?
I'm proud of the fact that for the first time in 7 years, the Senate cleared 3 appropriations bills across the Senate floor by overwhelming bipartisan votes. 87 on 2 of the bills, 81 on the 3rd. That hasn't happened in a very long time. I worked really hard to assemble the coalition, and we passed the bill that, for example, funds veterans benefits and funds military construction, that funds agricultural research and the Food and Drug Administration. Those are really important bills, and I hope we can keep that up. But it's the first time it's happened in 7 years. Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer, when he was the majority leader of the Senate, refused to bring our appropriations bills to the Senate floor. I got a commitment early on from the new Republican leader of the Senate, John Thune, that he would bring our bills to the floor. We're probably going to have some sort of short-term continuing resolution, but to ensure that government does not shut down. That's the worst of all options.
In your opinion, that's not an option?
I don't want it to be an option,
Okay.
and I think most people are committed to avoiding that outcome. One reason we didn't get more of the bills done is the administration was very late in submitting a budget. It was May before we had all of the budget documents, and that's very late. It's required by law to be submitted far earlier in the year, but with the new administration, it frequently is late.
And Senator, anything else we should be having our eyes on as we head back to the fall? Once the Labor Day break is over here, you're back in the thick of things. What's on your radar?
Well, my goal is to try to get the defense appropriations bill through. That's very important to our national security, but it's also important to Bath Iron Works, to the Pratt & Whitney plant that we have in the state of Maine, to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery. Maine punches above its weight when it comes to helping to strengthen our national defense. I'm very eager to get that bill through, and I'm very eager to get the bill that funds the Department of Health and Human Services through. That includes funding for the National Institutes of Health. I am a very strong supporter of medical research. We have rejected OMB, the Office of Management and Budget's proposal to slash the National Institutes of Health budget by 41%. Instead, in committee, we increased it by $400 million.
I was going to say, Senator, that does put you at odds with Secretary Kennedy, for example, in the Trump administration right now.
It does, but I think it is so important that America continue to lead the world in medical research, in developing cures and effective treatments and a means of prevention for devastating diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's disease, type 1 diabetes, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And we're making progress in all of those areas. And I don't want that progress to stop. And I don't want us to lose our young scientists and researchers to China, which is nipping at our heels, or to Europe, which is trying to recruit them.
It does feel, Senator, like you are, frankly, kind of caught in the middle here a little bit. You obviously are hearing from people saying, hey, you're pushing too hard back against the Trump administration, and you hear from others on the other side saying, you're not doing enough. How do you respond, I guess, when you get that criticism from, frankly, both sides?
I do get the criticism by both sides. I support the president when I think he's right. For example, I give him great credit for reforming the southern border, where we were having a huge influx of people crossing illegally, and that's very different from crossing legally. And I give the president the credit for getting that problem under control. I don't support his cuts in medical research, and my goal is to do what I think is in the best interest of the people of Maine and this country.
Well, Senator Collins, we certainly appreciate some extended time with you today. We really appreciate seeing you, Senator.
Thank you, Greg.